CMMC. Four little letters that are absolutely critical if you hope to do business with the DoD or one of their contractors, and possibly quite important even if you don't. Today, on this episode of the CyberWatch Expert Series. Welcome to the CyberWatch Expert Series. I'm your host, Curtis Franklin, and today I'm talking with Scott Montgomery, Vice President of U.S. Federal at Island. We're going to be talking with Monty about the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, which is a standard intended to increase trust in the cybersecurity of defense contractors and subcontractors. We're going to hear Monty talk about why CMMC is so critical if you're involved with defense work or work for a defense contractor, which factors can make it easier or more difficult to gain certification, and how even small organizations can attain the necessary CMMC. We're also going to talk about why CMMC could be of real interest to you and your organization even if you have no plans to go anywhere near the defense market. You know, cybersecurity best practices can be defined by a lot of different frameworks. And now, my conversation with Monty Montgomery. Monty, welcome to the CyberWatch Expert Series podcast. We are so glad to have you with us here today.
Well, thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Well, we always like to start by giving our guests a chance to introduce themselves. So can you tell us a little bit about, maybe it's a straight line, maybe it's a long and winding road that ended up with you sitting down with me here today?
I'll bury the lead a little bit on why we got together today. But my background was building and designing network security tools for really high assurance networks like the intelligence community and the Department of Defense. And after a long time spent at the company that used to be known as McAfee, people know it as Trellix today, two of the co-founders of Island asked me to take a look at what they were doing and talk about how to get ready for the public sector with Island, because they thought it was a natural fit. And the reason you and I got together today is because even then in 2022, which is when I did some consulting for Island, the very first thing out of my mouth to the guys was, this is going to change the way people tackle CMMC, particularly big guys trying to protect little guys and little guys trying to protect themselves. And many of your guests probably focus on the very largest organizations in the world, and I do too. But at the end of the day, this particular problem is made up of 80,000 organizations that vary in all, Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors. There are all kinds of organizations. And we have to make sure that we're protecting sort of the little guy along the journey with the big. And that's how I think we wound up here together today.
Well, I'm glad that we did, because what we're talking about is something that a lot of smaller organizations might have heard of, but may not think it applies to them, and that's CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification.
Yeah. So
let me first ask you, what is CMMC really?
Yeah. So if we liken this to a college course, okay? The protection of DoD data, it's DoD data 101. How do we protect DoD data 101? That's the college course. That's the one when you're signing up for your classes that you sign up for as one of these organizations. The homework is NIST 800-171. NIST is a government agency that produces best practices and hygiene documents for cyber, among other things. They do a lot of things up there at NIST. But one of the things they do is they collate sort of the requirements by different walks of life, sometimes enterprise, sometimes government. In this case, people handling DoD data as part of their day job. So the homework is NIST 800-171. And the final exam, the one that 75% of your grade is predicated upon, is the CMMC audit, which is, it's performed by almost like an exam proctor, a third party that comes in and looks over your shoulder and makes sure you tested to those requirements. So you have the course, it's DoD data, and how do I protect it? Because I'm a vendor or a sub-vendor to DoD. There's the coursework, which is this well-defined document. And then there's the exam, which is performed by an auditor that says, you nailed it, or hey, here's where you need some help.
Now, this has the sound of something that the folks at, say, Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics probably have a whole team dedicated to doing. But let's say I'm not as big as General Dynamics. Let's say I'm a small manufacturer. Do I still need to care about this? First, let me ask, if I do subcontract to a big contractor, or if by some chance I have a DoD contract, do I need to care about this regardless of my organization's size?
Yeah, it's the two worst words in technology. It depends, right? So there are organizations that will look at the homework, the NIST 800-171 checklist of requirements, and say, gosh, this is pretty burdensome. This is pretty onerous. I don't even understand some of this because I make rubber grommets. I'm not a cyber guy. They may decide to even forego pursuing these contracts any longer because of the cost associated. There will be some people that say, wait, my profit is predicated upon delivering that same rubber grommet that I sold to a car manufacturer to Lockheed later. So I need to do this. And then it becomes about two things. Am I compliant for my bid? Meaning, if I'm trying for a contractual effort, do I check all the boxes in that compliant effort? Meaning, they're going to look to see if I got audited someday. And then the second part is, how do I make this less burdensome on myself so I can afford it on an ongoing basis? Because I'll have to certify against this every now and again. So I think the first order of business, and you're right, Lockheed and these large manufacturers, they have gaggles of folks doing this. And they've been doing it before they were commanded to for their own business. Now they're being asked to get their own supply chains, their downstream subcontractors in order. And that's where the wheels start coming off the road a little bit. There's the financial analysis. What's the best way to do it? What's the easiest way to do it? What's the cheapest way to do it? Without being so cheap that you run the risk of not being compliant. It's complicated. It's super complicated. And the guidance, there are a lot of experts, but there's a lot of controversy insofar as who will actually make the requirements at what level, what will they request? Is what I'm doing on Thursday going to be judged at a different level on Friday? And it's complicated. The letter of the contracting law, which is how people decide what to bid on and not, will be, hey, this is the level of CMMC you need to either attain by yourself as a prime or attain by yourself as a subcontractor flowing up to somebody else's work. It'll be in black and white in the contracting language. The reason that so many people are asking you the question is we're in that gray period where people haven't started putting this into contract language and they're trying to guess, and that's hard.
I remember well the days back when HIPAA was a lot of guesswork. And as you say, it was not a comfortable time for anyone who was involved with that. So in this gray area, let me ask, we've talked about third-party risk and fourth-party risk. With this, if it is unstated, is there a level of downstream risk where they say, yeah, beyond this, it really doesn't matter anymore? Or are we talking about N+1 risk that really needs to be caring about this sort of thing?
This is such a great question. I'll give you editorial. I'll give you one man's opinion, right? That and $1.40 will get you the bold roast at Starbucks today, right? But what I'll tell you is that the requirements will go along with where the data proliferates to. So let's say you're the Lockheed size organization. I'm your small subcontractor. When you're building your big, warplane, for example, you have different size suppliers and they have different size suppliers. But think back to our college course, right? There's how do I protect DoD data, the rules of protecting DoD data, and the final exam. Well, does every single one of your flow down little subs need to have access to that same level of DoD data? Are all your subs created equal? No way. Some of them make overalls, right? Literally, like paper, or clothing, overalls, right? For the point, the purpose is, hey, we require this special denim in order to work on this warplane, and here's the overalls. Does the DoD deem that as controlled, unclassified information? They decide. If it is marked as CUI, then you have to flow down those conditions to your overall guy. If they don't mark it as CUI, then you could say, hey, Mr. Overalls, keep making overalls. We're going to keep buying overalls, but you don't have to comply with this requirement for this contract. And that's the key point. What if the overalls guy makes the same overalls for a different DoD program where they say, yeah, the overalls, yeah, that should be controlled information. So now the same overalls are marked by two different organizations as being CUI or not CUI. It's complicated.
So I've got a series of questions that's one of the reasons I love talking to people like you. They're just more questions that come up with every great answer. And one of the questions is on these contracts that you're doing. If you have your CMMC for a contract, does it necessarily follow that certification would apply if you bid on another contract? Or is this something that has to be done with every new contract?
This is another great question. And this is less of an it depends. It depends a little. When you have a standardized process by which you use, transmit, me send it to you, you send it to me collaborate with you on screen, and store. I don't mean in the filing cabinet, but digitally store, right? If you have a consistent process for what you do with CUI all of the time, it shouldn't matter much what CUI it is. On Tuesday, it's overalls. On Wednesday, it's nuts and bolts. On Thursday, it's missile fins. If they're all judged to be the same level of CUI and you have a consistent process for how you treat it, one size did fit all. There are levels to the data sensitivity. I'll give you an example. Most of the big guys that we talk about, that make weapons or vehicles or firearms, they're going to be judged at that third level of CMMC. First level's baby steps contracting. Here's your award on paper. It has information about who bought and what they bought. That's sort of, the base level of hygiene. The mid level is where most of your audience is going to, have questions about. Level 2. If you're a flow down contractor, you're a sub, or sometimes you're a prime, sometimes you're a sub, and you're always at level 2, and you have that consistent boundary around your CUI and how you get in and out of that boundary, and it's documented and it's repeatable, then yes, you've made it part of your process to leverage that CMMC authorization against everything that uses that method. Does that answer the question?
It does answer the question. And as always, it leads to a couple more. And the first one is knowing that most organizations today have some level of processing and or data storage in a cloud infrastructure.
Sure.
Are there cloud providers that make it easier or harder to gain CMMC?
Yes, this is really the root of the matter. What are the force multipliers for making it easier? Right? Because you have to remember, they make rubber grommets for a shock absorber for General Motors on Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday and Saturday, the same factory makes the same rubber grommet, but it goes on a shock absorber on a fighter plane, right? Same grommet. They're not in the cyber business. They're not even in the manufacturer of weapons of mass destruction or warplane business. They're in the rubber grommet business, right? They're in that huge rubber washer business. That's what they make. So the likelihood that they have expertise or wherewithal or can afford any, or with the cyber skills shortage, what it is, can find any that they can afford in their locale. All these questions are, wow, that's expensive and hard, and I don't know what to do. So what are the real question for the littles is, what are my force multipliers? Okay? What actually gets me out of this mess and someplace easier? Yes, cloud is a huge, huge level set for these organizations. There are the two largest providers that we can think of in cloud provisioning are, as it relates to people and interacting with those clouds, doesn't matter how you measure, it's in some order, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, it's Google, right? You probably have a Gmail account. I probably have a Gmail account. One of us has a Hotmail account. One of us uses an Amazon workspace. But between all of our listeners on this podcast, we covered everything, right? So those organizations are saying, hey, I'm going to produce cookie cutters of environments that if you stay within those boundaries, you'll be more likely to be compliant further along the road than if you did it yourself. Okay? It's not, think of it like, what was the yellow books, the Cliffs Notes? Think of them like Cliffs Notes, right? We go back to our college course. And now I have my syllabus and I have my textbooks, but I also have my Cliffs Notes, which don't give me the answers, but they help me strategize my thinking. These cloud environments are a great way to have Cliffs Notes to get ready for your audit, right? The other thing that's called out in NIST is a technology called VDI, virtual desktop, for lack of a better term. So I have a laptop and the session I'm looking at takes place on somebody else's infrastructure. And I get painted the results as pixels, okay? The problem, and that's written into NIST as a way to help, cut corners, right? Because it exists. But just like people used to ride horses from town to town before the advent of the automobile, there are more modern technologies since that documentation was written as well. That's why I'm at Island. The point for these small organizations is, what is something my rubber grommet maker can understand? Is my rubber grommet maker going to understand the inner workings of remote access and hygienic NIST compliant environments? The answer is no. Is my rubber grommet maker going to understand how a browser works? Because when he goes home, he uses a browser to set up stuff for his kids, or to set up travel, or to buy stuff, or, by the way, to check his time card back at the factory. Uses a browser all day, every day for those things. What if that was part of the Cliffs Notes? And that's where I think we're trying to help sort of the little guy at Island. There's other approaches. This is not unique. But where we're trying to help the little guy at Island is you make grommets. You're not in the cyber business. What's an interface your folks can understand? Browser seems to be a happy medium. That's really where I think we can help smaller organizations, is creating that boundary around that DoD data so that users can consume it without putting it someplace that puts their organization in trouble.
Okay, so we're coming down closer to the end of our time together. And one of the questions I have about CMMC, we are often talking about here on the CyberWatch Expert Series, helping companies find best practices for security, helping companies attain a greater level of maturity for their cybersecurity.
Yep.
Is, without the certification, the CMM, is that the sort of thing that could be useful to a company that's not necessarily doing business
Sure.
with the DoD to use as a model
Sure.
for attaining a higher level of maturity?
This is a super question. And there's a few answers. Number one, there's also an academia angle to CMMC, because many of the largest, most prestigious universities in the world are doing either Department of Energy research or Health and Human Services research, or DoD research. And CMMC will be used, I think, ultimately in the future across all of the government's subcontractors, both defense and not defense, over time. Second thing, I do believe in frameworks. This is a framework to help people be bid compliant and not break the bank in order to be able to service the Department of Defense with their labor hours. Okay. There are other NIST publications. There's a great one called the Risk Management Framework. It's produced by the same NIST organization, and it's for all walks of life that are small businesses to medium businesses to very large businesses who have no desire to do business with the Department of Defense or the federal government. But it's a NIST publication that says, hey, we've collected from thousands of organizations, from banks to healthcare to retail to manufacturing, oh, by the way, to government. And here's, if we were going to go to the dentist for the first time, what would the card say? It would say brush your teeth between meals. It would say floss at least once a day. It would say if you can, have a water pick and go to the dental hygienist. It's that kind of level of framework that I think a lot of organizations and a lot of your listeners could use, even if they have no intention of doing business with the government.
That sounds great. Now, we've covered an awful lot of territory in this conversation. Do you have a top 2 or 3 points? If someone's listening to this and wants to walk away with something they can just hold on to, what might those points be that people should leave this conversation with?
Yes. Number one, there are modern methodologies that can help you be secure, private, and more productive. Enterprise browser is one of them. But there are methods out there that through modernization, you can serve your business needs. Nobody wants to own cybersecurity or privacy. They want the byproduct. But there are modernized methods for having your cake and eat it too. Okay? That's item one. Item two, cybersecurity and privacy, they're contact sports and they're not for the faint-hearted. Don't go it alone. And it doesn't have to be a consultant you're paying big money to. There are communities of interest, both in and out of DoD suppliers. If you look at the ISACs, the information sharing centers, there are ISACs for retail, for insurance, for hospitality, for defense. There are great clearinghouses of information for organizations to learn from. Don't go it alone. And then the third item would be, use these frameworks as a way to further your business, not to become a cottage industry themselves. Compliance can't be the goal for compliance sake. It has to be compliance that furthers your ability to be profitable. If you're not doing both, you're going to create internal tension.
Outstanding. Well, Monty, my last question to you. If someone has heard this and says, boy, that Monty fellow has a lot of great thoughts about this, I sure wish I could keep up with him after the podcast is over. Do you have a social media presence or a blog or something where people can't keep up with you?
I guess I'm the furthest thing along on that would be just simply LinkedIn. I do a lot of commentary on LinkedIn to say, here's something you might want to be looking at. You could see who I follow for CMMC. I regard myself as an informed layman, not an expert. But there are people who I regard as experts, and you'll see, through my commentary and my likes, who I really look to and read on social media. But I'd be happy when you find me on LinkedIn to answer any of your questions as well.
We appreciate that. Well, Monty, thank you so much for being with us today. We truly appreciate it. Look forward to perhaps having a chance to talk with you again in the future.
My pleasure. Can't wait. Take care.
That was my conversation with Scott Montgomery. We appreciate Monty taking the time to be with us today. Join me next week for the CyberWatch Expert Series, when I'll have another experienced expert who'll help you gain the information you need to be more successful at making your organization cyber secure. This podcast has been brought to you by Access Point Consulting. Follow along with the CyberWatch Expert Series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And as always, you can learn more about Access Point Consulting at www.accesspointconsulting.com. I'm Curtis Franklin. We'll see you next week.